Yes, good evening, I'm Tam Cowan, and this is Tam Cowan's Magnificent 7. For 7 weeks over the summer, I'll be chatting to 7 magnificent guests. I'll be asking them 7 questions, and we'll also hear their 7 bits of magnificent music.
Sir, I salute your courage, your strength, your indefatigability.
I've met Saddam Hussein exactly the same number of times as Donald Rumsfeld met him. The difference is, Donald Rumsfeld met him to sell him guns. Senator, this is the mother of all smoke screens.
What a silly question. What a silly person you are.
Yes, my guest tonight is the one and only Mr. George Galloway. George, how are you doing?
Very well, Tom, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
Excellent, it was great. That was only 3 clips that we got.
Although everything else is in the 7s.
Everything else what? It was, exactly. It should have been 7 clips. Well spotted, George. You're paying attention. Good lad. Now, that's enough chit-chat just now, George, because we're at the mercy of the cards. I do have a pack of cards here in front of me.
Yep.
I am shuffling them as I speak. If you would just like to say stop.
Stop.
There we go. First card, George, up is fame. George Galloway, when did you realise that you were famous?
I was famous at a reasonable young age, at least locally. I remember when I was appointed the Labour organiser in Dundee in 1977, seeing the billboards on the outside the newsagents as I was on the bus going into the town, and the billboard said, "Marxist appointed to top job, shock."
Right.
And that's when I knew I'd made it.
Yeah, it's lovely. Were these the gorgeous days?
Yes, I mean, it was actually Tom Shields, the Herald columnist, that
Yes.
dubbed me Gorgeous George. And,
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and long ago he said I was the Perrier-drinking, dark-suited Dundee Labour city boss, Gorgeous George Galloway. And it stuck even though the looks faded long ago.
If you could have had your choice, forget Tom Shields, the old kind of rotund hack. Who would it have been? Anybody in the world who you'd have loved to have called you gorgeous? Who would that have been, George?
Well, I did talk once to Sean Penn about a movie. We were joking about a movie on my reasonably interesting and topsy-turvy life, because Ron Mackay and I were hanging out with him in San Francisco, in various Irish hostelries in San Francisco. And Penn said, "Well, if there's a movie, I'll play you." Well, it doesn't get better than that, does it?
No. So you've never dreamed it's only Tom Shields and Sean Penn. You've never fancied a woman calling you gorgeous, George? No.
Well, it used to happen, but only in the 70s. That was my decade.
Right, so that was you. You were famous in Dundee then, thanks to the billboard. What about national fame? What about Scotland? When did that kick in?
Well, I was the Labour Party chairman in Scotland at the age of 26, which certainly had never been matched before and can never be matched now because they don't elect their chairman. So I was fairly eminent in political circles. But of course, I would have thought it would have been the famine in Ethiopia in 1984-85 when I became, on a UK level, quite well known. And later still, when I got to be reasonably well known in some other countries in the world.
Right, okay. I think you'll find that was actually Bob Geldof, George, but you're maybe getting a wee bit mixed up.
Well, I was a part of that wave, though.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Did you get any credit then? Because mid-Jure kind of says that Bob took all the credit.
He did, kind of, but if you look back, or if you Googled it now, you'd see I was reasonably prominent. I had a full page in the Sunday Times, cover story in the Spectator. I was regularly on television, appearing in front of House of Commons select committees on the famine and so on. Yeah. So reasonably, yeah.
And did any of the folk in Ethiopia ever give you some donations towards Lockheed?
No, but no. I did travel very... I was bombed, actually, for the first time in Ethiopia by Soviet-supplied jets dropping American-supplied bombs. I called them vodka-cola bombs at the time in the Sunday Times. And it was a close-run thing, me and an ITN crew burying our faces literally into the sand as fragmentation bombs whirled around us, slicing people up, and there was a lot of people killed around about us. So it was a pretty early formative experience, and helped fuel, if you like, my real hatred of war, especially bombardment.
Yeah, right. No, so that was Scottish fame. We had Dundee fame, Scottish fame. What about the international fame then? When would that have been the American Senate time?
No, I was quite famous in the Arab world from the 1980s. I twinned Dundee with the Palestinian town of Nablus in 1980, so that's more than 30 years ago. And the town hall there became the first public building in the Western world to fly the Palestinian flag, which is flying there still, by the way, more than 30 years later. And that kind of made me in the Arab world. And over the intervening 30 years, my involvement with the Arab world grew and grew, and so I'm actually a good deal more popular, I must tell you, in the Arab world than I am in Scotland, evidently.
Right, now for the benefit of our listeners in Dundee, can you just describe the place that you twinned it with to see if you got it spot on?
Well, Dundee, of course, has the beautiful Sidlaw Hills and the Law Hill. Nablus is draped across two hills and joining in a valley at the bottom. It's a very, very beautiful city. At the top of the hill live the Sumerian people, the ancient Sumerian people from whom the Good Samaritan parable is drawn. They are a Christian community, of course, living amongst 99% Muslim population, but absolutely loyal and dedicated to the Palestinian struggle.
Yeah.
It's a very wonderful town, Nablus, as anyone who's ever been there knows.
Well, I've been there once in Nablus, and it had a fabulous Groucho's record store. Do they have anything like that in Dundee?
We had, you're maybe pulling my leg, but we did have a Groucho's record store in Dundee. And I once, by the way, sent my young brother, Graham, when times were hard, with all my LPs, groaning he was, under the weight of these LPs, to sell at a knockdown price to Groucho's. And I'll never forget him coming back with about maybe a dozen albums that even Groucho wouldn't take.
Oh.
And they were all Rod Stewart albums. Wouldn't happen now, of course, but it did then.
No, and I must say, I've looked down your list of 7 songs here, George, and Rod Stewart, lo and behold, does not appear.
Does not feature, no.
But you've teed us up lovely, George. We'd like to introduce your first song.
Well, this is probably I think, the finest popular music record ever made. It's almost 50 years old, but talk about evergreen. If this doesn't get your heart pounding, you've never been a teenager, you've never been in love. It's by the Ronettes. It's called Be My Baby.
Be My Baby, George Galloway's first choice on Tam Cowan's Magnificent 7. Now, George, if you just closed your eyes there while you were listening to that, where does that take you back to?
Oh, to the JM Ballroom in Dundee in Tay Street. Now, no longer, now a car park, I think. But where I met my first wife, where I winched a number of fabulous girls, used to walk them
on the same night?
On the dancing, not on the same night, no, not on the same night, but a really fabulous place, one of these traditional places where the bouncers wore bow ties and sort of sparkly jackets and so on, and were plucking people out the queue and telling them to walk round the block a few times before they came back, not me.
And of course, no any worries with bouncers or doormen now. George Galloway, that face, that'll get you in anywhere, I'm guessing, aye?
Well, I never go out, but if I did, I think I'd get in most places now.
Okay, right, card number 2, and the one word that's on it here, George, is job. Just tell us, George Galloway, what was your first ever job?
Well, it was in the summer that I left school. I went to work in the very same jute flax mill, actually, flax, which my grandfather had worked in when he arrived as an Irish immigrant in his teens. So it was quite a poignant coincidence. And I worked there cutting basically the old thread, old yarn off the bobbins, as they were called, and returning them to the assembly lines. That was my first job. It was the summer, I suppose, of 1972. But my first real job was in Michelin Tires, which was a 3-shift system, working 8 hours, and I was on the more skilled end of the production. It was what was called the ovens, which actually did the final cooking of ZX radials. I used to always say that I was the only member of Parliament that could make a ZX radial. Most people couldn't even change one.
Right, okay. And were you quite I don't mean mouthy in a bad way, but did folk know what George Galloway stood for in those days?
Yeah, I mean, this was in 1973 and 74. I'm a wee bit embarrassed now at how mouthy I was and how kind of, well, in a way stupid, you know, in a way wishing to be an industrial militant, wishing to be Jimmy Reed. at the age of 19 or 20, you know.
Did it ever get you in bother, George, with any of your pals or workmates?
No, the shop stewards liked me well enough, but I think they thought I was a wee bit of a pain in the neck at times. And so I was. I mean, I look back and cringe a wee bit at some of the bristling militancy I had at that time. But it was a good place to work, really good money, the best money to be earned in Dundee.
How much do you remember at the time? 73?
73, it would probably have been about 40 to 50 pounds a week, which when you're living with your mother and father is, you know, pretty good money.
Yeah, and of course that would be near as well, where if you like football players would have been barely earning hardly much more than that.
They'd have been on 100, 120.
Aye, aye. So there you go. Right, good lad. And what was your first job in politics? Your first paid gig in politics?
Well, I became a paid official of the Labour Party in 1977. I was the district organiser. I was the Marxist in the top jog shock, and I worked for the Labour Party from 77 to 83. When I moved to London to lead the Third World Aid Agency, War on Want, which had been founded by Harold Wilson. So it was very much a Labour-inclined, left-wing inclined development organisation. And I became quite close to Harold in that period in London when I first moved there.
So what was Harold Wilson like then? I mean, for me, I only remember seeing news footage of him or whatever. So what was he like as a person?
Well, by then he'd lost his short-term memory, so he couldn't remember if he'd asked you if you had wanted sugar in your tea, and he'd maybe ask you that an embarrassing number of times. But his long-term memory was incredible. I mean, he could and did quote verbatim speeches that he made, you know, in 1952 at the Manchester Trade Hall, and he'd quote big lumps of it, and absolutely verbatim if you went back and checked it. And he literally did say, as I said at the Blackpool conference in 1965.
Has Harold just come into the studio there, George? Did he just come in next to you?
No.
It's uncanny.
No, but by the way, you make that point. I was the last politician to meet Dr. Hastings Banda, the erstwhile president of Malawi, who of course was a Church of Scotland minister in Edinburgh, and who wore a Homburg indoors with a three-piece suit in the African sun day and night. And when I met him, Harold had been long dead, a decade. And Dr. Banda said to me, "How is the Prime Minister, Mr. Wilson? A very fine man, a very good friend of mine." I didn't have the heart to tell him that Harold was no longer Prime Minister and indeed had shuffled off this mortal coil.
Oh, I don't have the heart to tell you that was another rotten impersonation either, so that's okay. But what would be, George, I mean, you've had loads of jobs since then, of course, and you've been involved in all different areas of politics. What, though, would be your dream job?
I would have liked to have been a footballer. I dreamt of being a footballer, yeah. But I was a centre forward, and too short, therefore, at 5'8", really. I mean, unless you were Gert Muller, being 5'8" and a top striker would have been pretty well impossible. But I did score quite a lot of goals. In fact, the highlight of my political career was when I scored a goal at the Stretford end at Manchester United at Old Trafford, off a move involving Pat Crerand in suede shoes, Bobby Charlton, who clipped the ball across the box, and I volleyed it into the left-hand corner of the net at the Stretford end. Doesn't get much better than that.
And this presumably was a charity game?
Yeah. I mean, I ran the full-back ragged that day, but the full-back was Sinbad. Do you remember him? From Brookside on Channel 4.
He's about the same size
as...
as...
25 stone.
Your man Pickles, I was thinking of your political friend, yes.
I run him ragged. You can only play against what's put up in front of you.
Right. Now, what would have been, politically, George, a dream job? What would you reckon?
Oh, Foreign Secretary. I would have loved to have been the Foreign Secretary, implementing a socialist, progressive foreign policy. That would have been my dream, but obviously not to be. The wind shifted in politics in the early 1980s. Most of my erstwhile colleagues shifted with it. I never did. Stood where I had always stood, and well, it went out of fashion, but who knows, it might come back into fashion. Too late for me, but I hope it comes back into fashion.
Right, okay. Well, certainly a group who never go out of fashion are, of course, the Beatles, and they're number 2 on your list, George. What's the song?
Yeah, and it's in Congress because they didn't write this, but I think it's their best number. At least it's John Lennon's best vocal performance. And of all the Beatles, whom I loved John most of all. It's Twist and Shout.
Twist and Shout, George Galloway's second choice on Tam Cowan's Magnificent Seven, and we're on to card number 3, George, and the word on it is drink. Now, George, you are, if you like, famously teetotal, yes?
Yes, and my father before me, and my children after me, I'm very glad to say.
Yes, you've got quite strong views on alcohol, am I right, George?
I do, I kind of do. I'm sorry, it seems sometimes a bit, well, very Scottish and Presbyterian, though I'm far from that.
Right, but I'm guessing this can't be a health issue because you fear put the cigars away.
Yeah, I did for a long time, though. I'm 6 months smoke-free now, Tam, and feeling much the better for it, as is my pocket, because, of course, it was big Cuban cigars that I smoked, and for 30 years. But by the grace of God, I've kicked it, and I don't miss it at all. But it is partly a health issue. I do think that alcohol is actually extremely bad for people, but more importantly, I think it's extremely bad for society. And I always wondered how it was that smoking tobacco was becoming more and more criminalised, whilst imbibing alcohol was more and more glamorised. And you got sent to jail for smoking in a three-sided bus shelter, but you got sent to the House of Lords for selling drink.
Yes, aye, exactly right. Now, don't smoke, don't drink. What do you do?
Well, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't gamble, so therefore I'm quite a good catch, as you might say. I really have no particular vices. I have over the years, of course, had an eye for pretty women, and yes. I've been very privileged to have known many.
Yes, and you're no stranger to a bit of marzipan, George, are you? This is wife number 3, I believe.
Yes, and marzipan is one of my all-time favourites.
I thought you were going to say marzipan is what we named our kid. No, you did right.
No,
right, that's okay.
No. But it is. I mean, I do like wedding cake, and I am on to wife. I am on to wife number 3.
So, what does a woman, for the ladies listening, George? I enjoy the fact that I've always been able to attract a female listener to shows that I've done on Radio Scotland. So, with many tuned in just now, what would they be getting if they got a slice of George Galloway?
Well, it's below the watershed, so we can't go too deeply into that. But they get a twinkle in a blue eye. They get
what colour's the other one?
they get good conversation. They'd be able to go.
But George, can you turn it on for the one that you just talk about Palestine and American politicians?
No, I'm a very romantic person.
Well, give some of your kind of the smooth stuff. What's the sort of chat you would do with a lady of an evening? Well, at a candlelit supper.
Well, I would talk about her life. I'm a good listener. I'm not one of these people that sits down and treats people to the story of my life, partly because most people already know it. But I mean, I do think it's important for a man to be seen to listen to a woman. I think that's important. I love children. I believe in family life, despite the serial weddings. I do think that one man, one woman, one house full of growing children is the absolute ideal. I don't think anyone's ever found a better way of living. So women like that, I think. I mean, contrary to what might be imagined, I'm not any kind of philanderer. I do think that, as I say, love and romance is important. I'm a follower of Che Guevara, as you know, who said that in the last analysis, the true revolutionary is motivated by thoughts of love, and I am.
Right, okay. But if you started Che Guevara partner with a woman, Josh, she's going to switch off.
Oh, I don't know. A lot of women like Che Guevara.
What if a woman suddenly, though, you're sat there on the first date and he says, well, could I get you a drink? And she says, oh, I'll have a pint of lager and a whiskey chaser. Would that put you off her then?
It kind of would. It kind of would. I mean, I'm surrounded by people who drink alcohol. I'm not that fanatical. I don't go into pubs myself, but I've got no problem about people sitting in a restaurant drinking wine next to me. But I don't think I could be in love with a woman that drinks alcohol because I don't like the smell.
Okay. Well, sadly, the thing about pubs, and it's weird that you say that because only, I think, a week and a half ago, your next tune I played in a pub on a jukebox, that's what you're missing out. It is the Rolling Stones. What's the tune, George?
Well, it starts me up because it really, really starts me up.
Ah, this is a classic. Here we go. Me up, the Rolling Stones. George Galloway's third choice on Tam Cowan's Magnificent Seven. So far, I've asked George about fame, about jobs, about drink, and the next card off the top of the pack is, oh, well, this is an interesting one, George. We've maybe got about 25 cards to choose from, and in there for a fact I know is friend, but this is always the more interesting one. This is foe. F-O-E. George, your foes, where do we start?
Well, Tony Blair would be my number one foe, because I believe him to be a fundamentally dishonest person who hijacked the Labour Party and flew it to destruction. I think he has the blood of millions of people on his hands, and it's somehow made all the more obscene that he's now making vast amounts of money at the scenes of his former crimes. He's now an advisor to the sovereign wealth fund of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, of the royal family in Kuwait. He's working for oil companies in occupied Iraq. I mean, my contempt for Tony Blair is really, really bottomless, and not least because he destroyed the Labour Party that I loved a lot more than he ever did.
Yeah. Now, at the risk of blowing smoke up your backside, George, I am fond of an afternoon just sitting down at YouTube and looking through some of your classic clips when you've had run-ins with various people. But I don't think I've actually seen, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe a situation of one-to-one with you and Tony Blair. Does such a thing exist?
No, not, I think, on celluloid, but a particularly spectacular one occurred in the members' lobby just outside the gentleman's lavatory at the entrance to the House of Commons library, where unfortunately the public cannot go. But Alistair Campbell was walking him hurriedly along the corridor just before the war, the Iraq war, and I insisted on stopping him, and I predicted to him, to his face, absolutely everything that has happened. I told him that the fall of Baghdad would not be the beginning of the end, but just the end of the beginning, that the war would drag on for years and casualties would be in the hundreds of thousands, that there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but there would be thousands of Al-Qaeda in Iraq if he invaded and occupied it. But unfortunately, although he put on that, if you can picture Rory Bremner with that fixed grin on his face, well, he put that on and he affected to be listening, but it certainly didn't make any impact. And all the rest are fleeting foes to me. I mean, Hitchens, Jeremy Paxman. I don't harbour any grudges against anyone
Now,
else.
Jeremy Paxman, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it actually looks as if you enjoy the jousts with him. Is that just a bit of panto?
Well, it's partly, and he and I, in our exchange after my victory in 2005 in East London, that exchange is now taught in journalism school. I don't know if it's taught from one perspective rather than the other, or just things to avoid on both sides, but I mean, it was a pretty spectacular, for 6 o'clock in the morning, pretty spectacular exchange.
But could you sit down, George, and have a sparkling water with Jeremy Paxman?
Yes, I could.
A bladder?
Yes, I could, and have. And Anna Botting, the part you showed a clip earlier of my exchange with her on Sky News, which has been seen by almost 25 million people on YouTube in 5 languages from 2006. I actually do frequently sit down with her. And you may recall I accused her of her bias showing in every line on her face. And she just gently pointed out to me, Mr. Galloway, I don't have any lines on my face.
All right. Now, George, I hope you'd be big enough here to maybe give us a name. Has MD in these colourful exchanges ever actually got the better of you? Did you ever walk away from one of these interviews thinking, well, hands up, I get gubbed there?
No, really, no. I mean, obviously some are better than others, and you know as soon as you've done them that they are going to travel. I mean, I did one on Sky earlier this week on Libya, with a wee guy from the Stooge government to be in Libya, and I knew as I walked away from that would take off, and so it has on YouTube. Thousands now in just a few days have watched it. So some are better than others. But I'd need notice to come up with one where I thought somebody had gubbed me. Because I go into these interviews with something to say, you see. I'm not going into them like some tube that's going to be flummoxed by a questioner. Because I go on the interview with 3 points to make. and I'll make them, whatever the questions are, however hard the questioner tries to put me off.
Has MD ever, when they've heard that you're going to be joining them on the panel on Question Time, pulled out?
I don't know about Question Time, but at the Oxford Union, that happens frequently. When they put me in the debate, people who are supposed to be debating against me pull out. So much so...
Any big names?
The entire Labour front bench in the debate on the Iraq war, about 2 years after the war, the motion was this House supports the Labour government's policy on Iraq, but the only person they could find to move the motion was Ian Duncan Smith, the quiet man who formerly led the Tory party. They couldn't get a single Labour person to come and face me in the Oxford Union on that debate.
Right. Now, if you get phoned up and you were asked on Question Time next week, and David Dimbleby says, we're going to do something a wee bit different, George, it's just going to be me in the hot seat, with you at one side and your choice of guest at the other end of the desk. Apart from Tony Blair, who would you pick?
Well, it would be maybe Nick Clegg, because I think that the state we're in has much more to do with him than it has with David Cameron. I mean, the one thing that I took out of my electoral drubbing in Glasgow a few weeks ago was that I beat the Liberal Democrats, and the Liberal Democrats got a real doing, because I think that you expect this from the Tories. It's the same old Tories, but they're only able to do it because of Nick Clegg. So I really would like to get him, metaphorically speaking, in the boxing ring.
Okay, right. Tune number 4, George. Tell us all about this.
Well, Elvis was a part of the soundtrack of my life. I was born into an Elvis-loving family, and Elvis was never better than in the Sun session period of 1956, except maybe the comeback special in 1968, which, if you've got access to YouTube, repays a visit even now.
Okay, well, here is Elvis and Lottie Miss Claudie. No, Elvis Presley, Lottie Miss Claudie, the fourth choice from George Galloway. And George, talking of, well, we're still on the music there. The last time we had you on Off the Ball last year, there was talk of this Dusty Springfield, the musical. Is that still happening?
Well, it is, but not this August, unfortunately. A variety of things have intruded, not least that I have just completed my book on the Neil Lennon affair. It's called Open Season, the Neil Lennon story, and of course it deals with the extraordinary season that we've just been through, Tam, that you were eyewitness to, of course, in your other capacities. So that's taken up a bit of time, coming out very soon as an e-book and as a print book, and the elections, of course, in the Scottish Parliament. So unfortunately it won't be in August, it'll be later in the year, but we'll probably still launch it in Edinburgh nonetheless.
Okay, there you go. Now, as I said to you the last time you were on Off the Ball, George, the listeners thought there was maybe more mileage in George Galloway, the musical. Now, do you remember any of the songs that were suggested at the time?
I've wiped that from
Fantastic songs, including Lycra Virgin. I think that goes back to the Big Brother show. Yeah. Please Traduce Me, Let Me Go. Lick, Spittle and Roll. We liked that one as well. Yeah. Return to Senate. We like that. Indefatigable, that's what you are. Hey You, Gaddafi's My Crowd. And, of course, The Haunting, My Funny Palestine. So I think, George, it's going to be George Galloway, the musical.
Well, maybe. Well, I'll leave that to somebody else to write.
Aye, Dusty Springfield's other day. We'll get old Mr. Hitchens to write that. How about that?
Well, I hope God spares him and he lives long enough to do so.
Right, the next card, George, and here we go, one off the pile. Oh, here we go. The word is goal. Goal. So you're a big football fan, George. Now let's nail this down, George. Is it Dundee United or Celtic?
Celtic. Celtic.
Absolutely.
Although the former Dundee Hibernians, which now known as Dundee United, were the team that when I was young I'd go and see, because, well, I couldn't at that age go through to Glasgow, go around the country following the Celtic. But for the last 25 years or more, I've barely seen Dundee United and seen hundreds and hundreds of Celtic games. Right. That's my number one.
What was the last Celtic game you saw in the flesh?
It was an awful game in April against St Mirren, a 1-1 draw. It was absolutely awful in the flesh. Right,
well, happier times. On goal, that is the word in the card. What is the greatest Celtic goal that you've ever seen? They'll split this into two categories. First up, the most spectacular goal, and then the most important goal.
Well, the most important goal would be the winning goal in the European Cup final, of course, when Celtic became the first team to In fact, both those goals, Tommy Gemmell's and Stevie Chalmers, were two of the most important goals that ever went in. But the goals I remember most are the ones that Henrik Larsson scored. In fact, if I'd been allowed another record, Tam,
yes,
I'd have squeezed in, "Oh, won't you stay just a little bit longer?" It used to move me almost to tears when the entire Parkhead crowd would sing to Henrik Larsson, "Oh, won't you stay?" because he was just the dream.
But he did kind of stay for it. He got about 14 farewell games, did he not?
He did, but you know this, I'd probably give you my left hand, maybe even my left arm, to have him back in the Celtic team today.
Well, I don't know where that left hand's been, George, so you can keep that, all right?
Well, somebody once said that if there is reincarnation, they want to come back as Warren Beatty's fingertips.
Yes, I heard that.
That's a good one.
Now, where's Stuart Cosgrove to reel me in? He's not here. George, the most spectacular Celtic goal now. I'm thinking even Murdo McLeod's pile driver and Old Firm getting the ball rattled in the stanchion.
Well,
Do you have a favourite?
Yeah, you need to be of a certain age to remember this one.
Yep.
But when Big Billy McNeil rose to head that goal against Vojvodina, which took Celtic on their way to the European Cup glory, that was a spectacular and memorable a goal. I can still see Billy, you know, square-jawed, blonde, magnificent, rising, his head meeting the ball and it bulging in the back of the net, and knowing that Celtic were on their way to something really historic that can never be taken away.
Right, and what about a favourite international goal from you? Did Palestine play football?
Yes, they do, actually. In
No,
Arab
come on,
terms,
a Scotland goal.
In Arab terms,
Scotland.
they're very, very good. Well, I mean, I was a big fan, as my father, God rest him, was before me, of Dennis Law.
Yep.
I have a sort of collage or montage in my mind of Dennis Law overhead kicks, horizontal left wing, left foot lashing into the back of the net. It would be one of those maybe, or maybe Alan Gilzine, a much underrated player, scoring to beat England 1-0, rising at the near post, a glancing header of which he scored maybe hundreds. It would be one of those.
Okay, right now, Alan Gilzine.
James McFadden against France.
The 30-yarder.
James McFadden against France, to bring it more contemporary.
I would always claim that was almost a JFK goal. Do you remember exactly where you were when he hit the back of the net?
Well, I certainly remember and will never forget that goal. And I've often wondered what happened to James McFadden. He's now a free agent.
A free agent, that's ridiculous.
James was a bit of a genius, you know. I mean, he was up there. You could talk about him in the same breath as Dennis Law.
Absolutely. He'll need to start doing it again, that's for sure. Right, another genius. Let's move on to musical genius this time, George. Bruce Springsteen. Which tune are you going for?
He's my second favourite artist of all time. To see him live is really to know that you are alive. This one is what I like to think about as what socialism would be like. It's called Waiting on a Sunny Day.
On a sunny day, George Galloway's fifth choice on Tam Cowan's Magnificent Seven. And so far, I've asked George about fame, jobs, drink, foes and goals. And our sixth card, the one off the top of the pile, is, George, entertainment. Now, George, you see you're just a normal kind of guy at heart. You were talking about that earlier. So, for example, here we are, Saturday night. What are you doing after the show?
Well, I'm actually going home because Father's Day tomorrow, of course, is going to be a big day for me, my children, my grandchildren, all around me. So an early, quiet night tonight. But I like going to the pictures. I like going to concerts. I like going to the football. I like going to the boxing. I mean, that's entertainment. I'm not any kind of, you know, fanatic zealot that never thinks about anything else except football.
So what sort of gear would you like seeing at the pictures? I don't imagine it's kind of Jim Carrey films and that. Is it son a bit more? Slightly highbrow?
Well, I'm a massive fan of Jack Nicholson. I've watched all of Jack's films many times over. I like Robert De Niro. I like Al Pacino. I like Michelle Pfeiffer. Frankie and Johnny. Did you ever see Frankie and Johnny?
I have seen that.
It's one of the most fabulous love stories ever. Al Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer. I'm a big fan of hers. True Grit, the remake of True Grit, was the best film that I've seen over the last 10 years nearly. And I can't believe it didn't win any Oscars. It was beat by that rubbish, The King's Speech.
Yes.
True Grit, was as a performance by Bridges and by the young girl who was 14 years old. And she didn't get the best supporting actor, and I couldn't understand that.
Well, I remember you writing about that. You almost challenged the readers to a bet in your Daily Record column. You were convinced True Grit was going to clean up, weren't you?
I was, and it got gubbed, and by just this upper-class love affair with the royal family, it makes me sick.
So if you had to name one film, George Galloway's all-time favourite movie, what would it be?
As Good as It Gets.
Oh, it's a
Nicholson.
fantastic film. Yeah.
I may have seen it 10 times, and I still get something out of it. Yeah,
It's great. Now let's turn to another entertainment outlet, if you like, radio. Here we are on air just now, George. But if you were piddling about at home, what would you tune into on the radio?
Well, I mean, I think, although I'm a big critic of the BBC, that Radio 4 and Radio Scotland are worth the licence fee alone. So if I was in Scotland, I'd be listening to Radio Scotland. I really like yours and Stuart's programme, as you know. I've been privileged to be on it
Impeccable taste.
many times. But I mean, I tweeted tonight that you were one of the country's comic geniuses, and I really mean that. And Stuart's no bad as well. I used to like Janice Forsyth. Is she still on Radio Scotland?
Janice Forsyth, very much so.
I very much liked her programme. But Radio 4, you know, History of the World in 100 Objects, the Today programme, the PM programme, Eddie Mair, who's a good Scotsman, of course, is by far and away Britain's best reporter, best interrogator. Best radio presenter. And of course I work for TalkSport, and it's the Sony radio station of the year, which is quite an achievement for a sort of, well, hitherto regarded as down at heel, slightly white van radio station. I really love radio. They said that video would kill the radio star, but it certainly hasn't. You and I are living proof of that.
Exactly. Well said, George. Now, you did mention Radio 4. Radio 4 have just started a show called Desert Island Discs, which I think is a bit of a rip-off of this show. I think they only started a couple of weeks ago, where they allow the guests to pick some favourite tunes in between their music. And your next choice, George, I have to say, this is your kind of a classic Desert Island Discs choice. It is Pachelbel's Canon.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us why you've picked it?
Well, unknown to most people, I was once a classical musician. I played the double bass in the Dundee Schools Orchestra. I used to go to Aberfoyle with the Scottish Schools Orchestra. I like classical music. I just thought that for a snappy show like this, we needed to stay more or less in the one genre, but I wouldn't like people to think I was monomaniacal. This particular piece of music reminds me, again, like the last one, of socialism as an idea, because I once saw a documentary about penguins on the frozen waste and the perfect synchronicity and harmony of their lives, how they huddle together, look after each other, keep each other warm, keep each other's eggs warm, never fight with each other, never go to war with other penguins. And this reminds me of it, Pachelbel's Canon.
Beautiful choice by George Galloway. I say Pachelbel. Pachelbel, is it Pachelbel?
Pachelbel, yeah.
Pachelbel's Canon by, is it Mozart? I'm only kidding you on. Right, Pachelbel's Canon by, what was Pachelbel's first name?
I don't know that.
Oh, George.
I don't know that.
We'll find that out before the end of the show. But a lovely wee tune. We're just hoping next week's guest, Barry Ferguson, doesn't pick that as well, because we don't like being repetitive on this show. But it was George Galloway's choice, and we're on to your 7th and final question. So far, I've been asking George about fame, jobs, drink, foes, goals, and entertainment. And his final card off the top of the pile, one word, money. George, what does money mean to you?
Money don't matter too much, as Prince famously said, and it certainly don't matter tonight. I mean, for example, I'm working here, as are you, but I'd give you money to have appeared on this show, because I've actually really enjoyed it. It's made me happy, and I like to think that it might have entertained the people that are listening to it. So I don't do things only for money, of course, but at the same time, it takes money to buy mince, and by the grace of God, I've had good jobs, well-paying jobs. I've, in terms of assets at least, have been, by most people's standards, become quite rich. But I'm much richer in spirit. I'm much richer in the non-financial things that I have. Money is something that one day, I hope, in the dim and distant future, will be no more. That everyone will contribute to society what they are able to contribute, and everyone will take from society what they need to take. That's what I believed as a young man, and it's what I believe now as a middle-aged man, and will believe when I'm an old man.
Okay. I got a feeling when this show's finished, George, you're going to get a call from a desperate Ali McCoist.
Imagine that Israeli preferring to play in Mallorca than Govan.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. Where could you go with that one, George? But, George, what's probably been the best earner of your life?
Well, I worked for a long time for the Mail on Sunday, which then, as now, I think, probably outpaid everybody else in Fleet Street by a very long chalk. Certainly as a Daily Record columnist, both of us know that we're definitely not doing that just for the money. I suppose my main money, Tom, has come by virtue of libel cases against newspapers that traduced me in a defamatory way.
Have you got any others of these lined up, George?
Yes, I've got a big one coming from the News of the World, because it's now established beyond contradiction that they were hacking my telephone and over and over and over again in order to steal information from my phone that was private to me. It's a criminal offence, but it's also a civil offence, and they'll have to pay me a very, very large sum of money if they're going to bring my case to a conclusion. So that's in the pipeline. The libel game's not the same as it was. The damages have come down, and newspapers are generally more careful with me now, though for many, many years they were extraordinarily reckless. I mean, you'll remember the famous one with the Daily Telegraph, not the big 2 million one, but when they confused me with George Fawkes, the erstwhile chairman of Hearts, and had me staggering drunk at a Scotch Whisky Association and knocking over a bobby, and 2 old ladies, and ending up in the jail.
Oh, you could have written your own cheque there, I would imagine, yeah?
Exactly.
Fantastic. Right, okay, and what about the touring and that, and these the one-man shows? How are they going, George?
Well, I'll be promoting my Neil Lennon book, as I say, over the late summer and autumn. I've got in Brixton next Saturday afternoon, the mother of all afternoons, Coffee and Cupcakes with George Galloway. So any of your listeners that are within striking distance of Brixton, there'll be an honour guard from the local population, so the EDL needn't turn up. Then I think they'll have a good afternoon. I'm doing these. The next one will be in Manchester. I can fill halls, and people pay money to hear me, and there's not many politicians about whom you could say that. So I thank God every day for my blessings, Tam, not the least of which has been being a friend of yours.
Good lad. Thank you very much, George. Right, well, George, if you'd just like to tee up our last tune just before I close the show, what's it going to be?
Bob Dylan is the Shakespeare of our age. He's the greatest writer in English since Shakespeare. His best album was Blood on the Tracks, and the best track on Blood on the Tracks is Tangled Up in Blue.
Okay, well, thank you very much then to George Galloway, gorgeous George Galloway indeed, the teetotal George Galloway, who could have been played on screen by Sean Penn. He would give his left arm to get Henrik Larsson back at Parkhead, and he would love to get Nick Clegg in the ring. Make up your own jokes there, folks. Thanks very much to George. Be sure to tune in same time next week, when I'll be joined by none other than Lorraine Kelly. But for now, here's George Galloway's all-time magnificent tune. It is Bob Dylan, Tangled Up in Blue.